Let's bring in Ryan Mauro. He's a national security analyst with the Clarion Project and a professor of counterterrorism at Liberty University. Ryan, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Ryan, as we mentioned, National Security Advisor John Bolton has been in the United Arab Emirates. He has been a longtime advocate for regime change. President Trump has said recently that regime change is not necessarily the goal, but the goal is to ensure that Iran does not get nuclear weapons. Is there a disconnect between the two, or is the only way to ensure that Iran does not get nuclear weapons through regime change?
Well, I think there is a scenario where Iran would dismantle some, maybe most, of their nuclear infrastructure if they thought their survival was really in danger. But at that point, the question becomes, do you just support the Iranian people and the Iranian opposition so that we can be done with this and the regime can be gone, or do you cut a deal? And so I think there is a disconnect. They'll deny it, but there's clearly a disconnect, and there always has been, between Bolton and Pompeo on one side, both of which have advocated supporting regime change and a Cold War type policy for helping the Iranian people overthrow the regime rather than invasion, versus Trump's more non-interventionist approach and not favoring regime change. And that could come to a head if the Iranian regime feels like they're put up against a wall and the regime has to basically come to Trump and say, look, we're willing to concede on our support of terrorism and development of nuclear weapons, but you've got to concede on your support of human rights and maybe sell us surveillance equipment and other things to oppress our own people. And that'll be a difficult choice.
Do you see that happening? I mean, at what point do you see the current regime in Tehran, the Ayatollahs, being put under so much pressure that they do come to the negotiating table and try to work out that kind of deal?
It might not be that far off. If you combine the economic pressure that they're facing right now, which is so immense that, according to the reports out there, they're cutting their budgets to their various proxies, even to their cyber warfare program. And if there were to be protests in the streets of Iran that quickly spread, just like in the Green Revolution in 2009, 2010 that we saw, then the regime would be facing a situation where they'd have to say, what do we do to survive? And cutting a deal like that with the United States would be their most likely path for survival. And at that point, there's going to be a very ferocious debate within the administration, if it comes to that, about principles, whether we stand by human rights, and whether we pursue essentially victory in the ideological war, or whether we go after a deal in order for short-term political gain.
But again, Ryan, one of the biggest criticisms against the Iran nuclear deal was that it wasn't all-encompassing, that it didn't address Iran's military aggression in the region, that it didn't address its sponsorship of proxy terrorist groups, that at best it delayed its development of nuclear weapons, if it even did that. But does a deal that the president now negotiate have to, at the very least, include Iran's military adventurism as well as its nuclear weapons program? Putting aside human rights issues for now, does it at least have to make sure that there are no more ballistic missile tests, that it stops sponsoring terrorist groups, stops sponsoring proxy wars in the region? Does it have to cover all of that, not just nuclear weapons?
I think it does, and I think that's been the Trump administration's position actually from the beginning. Sometimes in his public statements, Trump only refers to the nuclear element of the equation, but then on other occasions, he's also referred to the issue of state sponsorship of terrorism. I can't imagine Iran telling the truth in saying, oh, we're going to cut off all support to our proxies. That's just, ideologically, it's something that they can't do. Curtailing their activity, that might be something that they'd be willing to concede on and then probably violate that pledge later on. But making a short-term pledge to do so, I could see the Iranian regime pulling that type of move.
Yeah, and they haven't exactly had the best track record in sticking to agreements that they've made. So I see your point on that one. So in order to change Iran and Iran's behavior, it seems like regime change is the only solution. So what could the Trump administration be doing, even covertly, to help that, to help bring about more of an uprising within the Iranian government, to help the next revolutionary movement?
Oh, there's so much that can be done that is non-violent, and you can just take the playbook that won the Cold War, use the same type of strategies and modernize them that was used against the communists in order to win the Cold War, bring back the Cold Warriors and say, give us your playbook. and that would include covert and overt support to dissident elements within Iran and outside of Iran. It would be mobilizing Shiites that oppose the Iranian regime and elevating them to give them a platform, and various covert measures that you could do to destabilize the regime, again, non-violently. And these are all things that we should have been doing for a long time, and many people have been calling for, but just was never done because every politician, it seemed to think that they could be the ones that strike this grand bargain with the Iranian regime, as if something would change because they were the ones talking to these theocrats.
Ryan, thank you so much as always, Ryan Mauro.